and welcome to Hawk Mountain Sanctuary's Stay at Home Speaker Series. Today's program is Chasing Broadwings from Pennsylvania to Peru with Dr. Laurie Goodrich, Sarkis Acopian, a Director of Conservation Science at the Acopian Center for Conservation Learning with Hawk Mountain Sanctuary Association.
Hi everybody, happy Memorial Day.
My name is Jamie Dawson. I'm the Director of Education at Hawk Mountain Sanctuary, and we're so thrilled that you're joining us here today. As you may know, Hawk Mountain is the world's very first refuge for birds of prey, and we continue to work hard to be leaders in raptor conservation, science, and education, locally and globally around the world. Hawk Mountain is a private nonprofit, and membership is the lifeblood of our organization. To all our members, thank you so very much for your continued support. It means the world to us. If you're joining us today and you're not a member, we hope that you consider becoming one in the future. Hawk Mountain hopes that everyone remains safe and healthy during these times of COVID crisis, and we are so excited to offer our community a variety of free virtual programming. As always, Hawk Mountain greatly appreciates and depends on any donations. Just so everyone is aware, today's program is being recorded, and the video will be accessible on Hawk Mountain's YouTube channel as a continued resource. We also have a link on our website directly connecting you to our YouTube channel. At any time during today's program, viewers may submit questions through the Q&A feature on the Zoom platform. We've designated time at the end of the program to take some questions from the audience. And we are absolutely thrilled that Dr. Laurie Goodrich is joining us today to share with us some of her amazing long-term research on broad-winged hawks. Before we get started, I'd love to take some time to share some of Laurie's impressive background experience with our audience. Laurie earned her PhD in ecology from Penn State University and her master's in science in ecology from Rutgers University. She was hired at Hawk Mountain as the first full-time research biologist in the 1980s. And coordinated migration monitoring and research for more than 30 years. Laurie has probably spent more time counting raptors at Hawk Mountain than most other people. Laurie also served as the interim director of education for 4 years, from 2010 through 2014, and was promoted to the director of conservation science in 2019. Laurie initiated and manages Hawk Mountain's long-term research on the full life cycle ecology of the broad-winged hawk. She is a member of the board of directors of the Hawk Migration Association of North America, otherwise known as Humana, and serves on the Ornithological Technical Committee of Pennsylvania Biological Survey. Also, I'd like to add that Laurie's professional achievements have been recognized with 8 different awards. So congratulations, Laurie. Laurie, you have dedicated your life to raptor science and conservation. How did you get led onto this path?
You know, like any path, I think there's many beginning points, and it's hard to really say exactly, but I know when I was in 2nd grade, our 2nd grade teacher read us the story, the Rufus the Red-tailed Hawk, and Rufus, as part of his life, flew over Hawk Mountain. So if there's any kind of destiny out there, that probably was a beginning point. But the main impetus for me to get involved in study of birds was my college professor, Dr. Ryan, at Hobart and William Smith Colleges.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Would you mind sharing with us some of your most rewarding experiences working at Hawk Mountain Sanctuary for going on close to 4 decades?
Oh gosh. You know, I love my job at Hawk Mountain and I love everything about it. There's so many rewarding things that it's hard to pick one. But I would say in general, I think one of the best parts about my job is being able to share the migration with the public and standing on top of North Lookout and pointing out a close flying eagle or fast moving peregrine to a young man standing there, a young woman. That's got to be one of my favorite activities.
Awesome, Laurie. Okay, I think we all are waiting to learn the details, the juicy details of your broad-winged hawk research. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, let's see if I can do this here. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you see that?
Looks great.
Okay, thanks everybody for joining us today. I know it's a Friday afternoon. You're probably not ready to hear some heavy science, but hopefully you'll find this as exciting as I do to learn about the migration of broadwing hawks, one of our most common migrants. And before I get going, I would like to just recognize that I've put Rebecca McCabe as a co-author here because Rebecca was a trainee at Hawk Mountain when we started this project, and a graduate student, and now is a colleague, and I would consider her a co-investigator on this long-term research project on broadwing hawks. Also, I'd like to recognize right at the outset some of the collaborators, so I don't forget. There's a lot of folks that are integral to collecting the data I'm going to talk today about, both including at Hawk Mountain, but also at East Stroudsburg University, Allegheny National Forest, and the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center collected some data, along with the University of Alberta, that we're going to be talking about today. And I want to thank our donors that allow this project to continue. Studying migrating hawks over long distances is a costly endeavor, but lots of rewards to be had. The Game Commission gave us a very important grant in the beginning that we matched with donations from the Kittatinny Ridge Project and Addis Corporation and others, and we had funding from the Wild Resource Conservation Fund. And also Hawk Mountain members have been really important donors to the project, and many other generous private donors are continuing to support what we're doing and keep the project going. So thank you, thank you, thank you to everybody. And it takes a village to study broadwing hawks. Finding a nest is not easy, and we've had lots of field assistants and volunteers over the years, and I just want to thank them and the landowners in the second group of names here that allow us access to the land where the broadwings are nesting so that we can study them further. And thanks to the photographers for any great photos here are not mine, so just keep that in mind. So why should we study broadwing hawks? We see a lot of them on migration. What's so interesting? Well, as you know, Hawk Mountain's been counting hawks since 1934, and we average almost 20,000 hawks on average each fall season. And nearly half of those are broadwing hawks. And they fly in these large flocks that soar over the lookout. They attract a lot of attention from visitors and hawkwatchers, but we really don't know much about their migration other than what we see when they're flying overhead. In addition, they are the most numerous hawk at most eastern North American hawkwatch sites. So it's not just Hawk Mountain, but all the hawkwatch sites. The broadwing hawk is the most numerous counted bird. But again, we don't know much. After they fly overhead and leave us, we really don't know what they're doing with their days and how far they're going, and lots of questions. What do we know about broadwing hawks? Broadwing hawks are a predominantly breed in the eastern North America, in this blue area here that you see, but they do also breed across Canada all the way into Alberta. And they are what we call a complete migrant, which means everybody that's breeding here on the blue area leaves that area in the winter and goes to a discrete additional area, another area called their wintering area down here in Central and South America. So they're a long distance migrant, or a neotropical migrant, as we might call them. In addition, if you think about broadwing hawks, they're built for migration. They have these wide wings and this chunky body and wide tail. And they actually do spend big proportion of the year, 1/3 to a half of the year, in migration. The outer loop here is the migration period of the year. And you can see from August, September, October, and November, we have birds on the move, broadwing hawks. And then again, starting in February through May. So they could be spending up to half their year in migration, which is pretty incredible. But in addition to that, scientists know from studies on songbirds and shorebirds that the most risky part of a bird's life is the migration. So the fact that these birds this species is spending so much time on migration, we really need to know more about it, and we need to understand the risks and the conservation threats. So what do we know about broadwing hawk migration? As I mentioned, they are a complete migrant, which means everybody in the breeding ground leaves to a discrete wintering area. They are a long distance migrant, and they migrate in flocks. They form these large flocks, which allow them to capitalize on thermals and identify thermals and save energy on migration. In addition, they have a highly concentrated migration period. If you can look down at this map at the bottom, you can see the timing of the migration is very concentrated, almost within 1 week or a little bit longer at each individual site across North America. And because of that, they concentrate in these large numbers. You can see Hawk Mountain usually sees a peak day of over 2,000 birds. If you're up along the Great Lakes, you may see a day of 150,000 birds. Down in Texas, the concentration grows, the birds are collecting together, and they can have a day of almost 500,000 birds. And then of course in Veracruz, Mexico, which is down along the Gulf Coast of Mexico, you can get up to 1 million birds in one day. So an amazing concentration of birds. But recently, there has been increasing concern about broadwing hawks because of the declines that have been noticed on migration counts. And this is a map that shows significant trends for the period of 2004 to 2013 from migration watch sites. This is compiled data from the Raptor Population Index. And just within the Atlantic and Appalachian Flyway, you can see that almost half of the watch sites that were analyzed for that time period showed a decline in broadwing hawks migrating past those lookouts. Now, since then, we've seen some of these sites have leveled off. They're not showing a continued decline, but they're also not showing a rebound. So there seems to be something going on in this flyway. And we do know that in Pennsylvania, the numbers of the distribution of nesting pairs of broadwing hawks within the state has declined. Like almost 20% from the 1980s to the 2000s. And you can see in these areas of the map where you see a lot of yellow, those are areas where broadwing hawks were nesting during the 1980s and are no longer nesting currently. So, and we can see that a large portion of that decline has occurred in the southeastern region of Pennsylvania, just to the south of Hawk Mountain. Because of these reasons of concerns about decline, we wanted to take a closer look at broadwing hawk ecology. And of course, Rosalie Edge, the Hawk Mountain founder, had the very wise saying years ago that the time to save a species is while it's still common. And fortunately, broadwing hawks are still common, but they are declining. So if we're going to be able to affect some conservation for this species, this is a good time for us to try to understand what's going on. So in 2014, we launched this study, which we call a full life cycle study, because we're studying all periods of the bird's life. And some of our overarching goals were to understand breeding ecology, habitat use, nest success in different habitats, also to understand the migration ecology, and really just answer some basic questions. Where are Pennsylvania birds going? How do they migrate? What are the threats? And then also where they're wintering. Are they going back to the same site year after year? Do they wander around? Do they stay in one place? And what are the threats? And also to estimate their survival throughout the life cycle. So our long-term goal is really to come up with some conservation recommendations and to try to really understand what's going on with this species. In this talk today, I'm going to mostly focus on migration ecology, but I'm going to touch on breeding and wintering just a bit as it relates to migration. So this is the same map that we looked at before, the state of Pennsylvania, and these little red X's refer to the 4 study areas where we were studying broadwing hawks within Pennsylvania. And this little red X right in the center right is where Hawk Mountain is. So you can see that we were studying them right around Hawk Mountain, or we have been studying them also in the Pocono region up to the northeast, in the far northwest, which is the area of largest contiguous forest within the state of Pennsylvania. It's Allegheny National Forest. And then down in the southeast, we've been studying them as well, where we also are seeing some declines. Now, breeding behavior, I'm just going to touch on quickly. We collected a lot of data on nesting broadwing hawks using 2 methods. One was people sitting out in the field observing the nest, but also cameras. And you can see a camera here attached to the tree. And then this other arrow is pointing down to the nest. And that allowed us to collect lots of data on what the birds were doing, how often the parents were feeding them, and whether they were incubating them for long periods of time, and all kinds of different questions. And I'm going to hopefully share a very short video here on the next slide. If you have the ability to turn off other things so that it doesn't interfere with the transmission, you can do so, but it's just a short video. And what we're seeing here is the nest in Naringal. This is Abba, one of our adult females. She just delivered a small mammal to the 3 young in the nest. And by using video, we can stop it and start it when we want, and we can identify what the parents are bringing into the young. We have many little clips of the nest shots on our Vimeo site. So if you're interested in seeing some more cute chick shots, Broadwing chick shots, you can take a look there. But that's the kind of data that we were able to collect for our breeding ecology study. And you can see here, this one chick has the small mammal in his talon here. He's not going to share it at all. So that's the kind of data that we're able to collect using cameras and observations, and these are some of the results. We were able to get a real handle on what Pennsylvania broadwings are eating or feeding their young, and what we found was that almost 38% of all the prey items were small mammals, and 12% were actually chipmunks. So chipmunks are really an important prey item for broadwing hawks, but they also are eating small birds, often the nestling birds, and they're eating lots of snakes and frogs as well as insects. And in some areas of the country, we see that broadwings eat a lot more frogs, and that's probably in areas with a lot more wetland habitat. But this gives us a good snapshot of broadwing hawk feeding ecology. They tend to be a bit of a generalist, which is to their advantage when habitats are changing. In addition, we were studying the habitat around the nest sites, and what we found was that area that broadwing hawks are choosing heavily forested areas. Over 80% of the area around the nest is forested, with very small bits being in development or open areas. Finally, another key finding from our breeding ecology study was that the site fidelity of these birds is incredibly high. They return year after year to the same nesting territories. This is a male bird that we copied and didn't telemeter, but he returned at least 4 years in a row to the same nest site, the same breeding territory. They don't use the same nest every year, but they build a nest fairly nearby in a different tree. Okay, so let's talk about what we learned from migration ecology and how we studied the migration. The questions that we wanted to answer were basic descriptive questions, the routes the birds are taking, where they're going, how fast they're moving. But we also wanted to compare these kinds of things between adult and young birds, males and females, and then geographically, Pennsylvania to Alberta. How do we catch the birds? Broadwing hawks are not easily trapped, and they're not easily trapped at all during migration. So really the best time to trap a bird, to put a telemetry unit on it, is during the breeding season. So we needed to find those nests so that we could put units on the adults. So in order to do this, what we do is we put a fake great horned owl that you can see out here on the far left side of this photograph. It's a mechanical owl, and we play a call of a great horned owl, so the broadwing hawks think it's a real owl. And then we put nets around it so that when the broadwing comes zooming in to try to get rid of the owl, then it gets caught in the net and then we catch it. Now, why do they dive at the owl? The reason is that owls are predators of broadwing hawk nests and the broadwing hawks themselves. So when a broadwing hawk sees an owl near their nest site, they want to get rid of it to save their young from the owl. And then I am going to talk a little bit about 3 juvenile hawks that we tagged, and of course we trapped them by climbing into the nest and putting a unit on the bird late in their nestling period, so that we could follow them after they fledged. Units that we're using are PPT transmitters. They weigh about 9.5 grams. This is what they look like. They're solar powered. They have solar panels on them. which is a double-edged sword. It's good because it recharges the battery when it's out in the sun, but because Broadwing hawks are forest birds, sometimes they would go quiet on us because the birds were not spending enough time in the sun. And we were able to set the duty cycle, which means we could allow the batteries to last longer. So most of our transmitters were on a cycle of 5 hours on, so it would signal for 5 hours to the satellite, and then it would be automatically turned off for 24 hours. The first year we did use a different duty cycle, but because we were during that year, 48 hours off was just too much loss of data during migration. We switched to this other routine. And then finally for males are, as you may know, male raptors are smaller than female raptors. So in order to stay under the 3% body weight that is necessary so that we don't affect the birds with this tag, we had to use a 5-gram unit on the males. And that was a mixed success. So from 2014 to 2019, we deployed 14 satellite units on female Broadwing hawks. 10 of those were adults, 4 were juveniles. One of the juvenile unit didn't work after a short period of time, so that wasn't included in our data. And we also deployed 2 units on males. One of the males we retrapped and then retagged with a different unit after it also failed. Notable is that this is the first study to ever put units on juveniles. So this data that we're going to be sharing with you is new to the world. And it's only the second study really that's been tagging adult Broadwings. So there hasn't really been a lot of research on Broadwing hawk migration. In Alberta, as part of the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center studies, they put units on 3 adult Broadwings in Alberta, 2 females and 1 male. So I'll be talking about those data as well. What have we learned about Broadwing hawk migration? Well, before we even talk about migration, we've been learning a ton of stuff about summer movements of birds. This is Rosalie. She's our Broadwing hawk that nests on Hawk Mountain's River Rocks area. You can see her movements over 3 years are all over the place. But this is incredibly important data for conservation, because we can, by understanding what habitats the birds are using during their nesting season, we can do a much better job of trying to protect areas for Broadwing hawks. But one of the new discoveries of our research, we didn't even anticipate at all, was that some birds, and we had 36% of the birds that we tagged, both adults and juveniles, behaved like this. They did what we call a pre-migration movement. So they moved from their nesting area to some other area before they migrated. And this area here is Hawk Mountain, this little white spot at the bottom, surrounded by red. And then over here, we have the nesting area of Abo, who was one of our birds from 2014. And you can see right after her young fledged from the nest in mid-July, Abo left. She left all the young with the males. She said, "See ya, I'm going on vacation." And the male stayed behind and was feeding the fledglings, but she left and she went all the way over here into Northumberland County, spent some time and then wandered a little bit around in central Pennsylvania and then hung out here until she migrated. And this has been observed before. What we saw was that these birds, the ones that displayed this behavior, were moving anywhere from 15 to 38 miles, usually in a westerly or northwesterly direction to a discrete other site before they migrated. And this has been observed in ospreys in Europe, and it was hypothesized by researchers there that the females were leaving their nesting territory in order to allow more prey for the young to find after they fledged. But we really don't know why some birds do it and why some birds don't. So it's kind of interesting discovery. And just some quick definitions before we start talking about migration. Because we have these different kinds of movements occurring, we defined the beginning of fall migration as the very first location that was more than 20 kilometers and south of their breeding and post-migration site. And then on the other end of the scale, the beginning of the spring migration was the first location that was north of the wintering site. And then finally, one of the things we wanted to look at with Broadwing hawks was, are they displaying any stopover behavior. And what is stopover? Well, stopover is basically when a bird spends, well, we defined it as when a bird spends more than 24 hours in one place during its migration. So it's not an overnight roost. An overnight roost, a bird just goes down, gets up the next day and leaves. It's actually a place where they're spending some time. And so we wanted to look at where those stopovers were occurring and how long they were. And we did find that on average, they lasted about 2.5 days for the birds that we studied. So if you remember back to that earlier when I was talking about migration and broadwing hawks, we talked about how it's very tight time sequence when birds are migrating through certain areas across the continent. You see, we basically see most of our broadwings within 1 week. Well, we found out that the initiation of fall migration in the birds of Pennsylvania was highly varied, with birds leaving on migration anywhere from July 25th to September 15th, and then arriving anywhere from October 17th to January 1st. So the timing on an individual basis does not seem to be that tightly coordinated. Juveniles left generally in the 3rd week of August and arrived between November and January. And then the Alberta adults left a little bit later in the 1st week of September and ended their migration on their wintering areas in late November and late December. In the spring, again, we see wide variation in the date of initiation of migration, anywhere from early December all the way to the end of February. Let's look at some migration in action here. These are 2 different years, and each of the colored lines in the next series of maps is going to be an individual bird. So this red line is Patty, this purple line is Kinzu, the yellow line is Rosalie, and so on. So these are all individual birds. So where you have multiple lines, those are different years of migration or different seasons. So this is Penny going down and Penny coming back, or this is Penny coming back and Penny going down, and the same here. And what I wanted to show you that is in mid-September is when we are standing at North Lookout and we're looking up and we're seeing thousands of broadwings. It's the peak migration period. Our Pennsylvania broadwings were all down in Virginia and West Virginia. These little dots show you where they were on September 15th. So most of Pennsylvania broadwings, not all of them, but most of them were already out of the state. So the birds that we're seeing flying over, no surprise, were not Pennsylvania birds. The other thing I want to emphasize here is look at those lines. What are they doing? These birds that we tagged up in northern Pennsylvania, eastern Pennsylvania, Hawk Mountain area are all paralleling the Appalachian Mountain chain on their way south. And that's pretty cool. I mean, they're not going due south and zigzagging around into South Carolina. They're following this mountain that we on every day to watch the birds all the way down south. If we look at the migration in total over here on the left, you can see all the Pennsylvania migration paths coming out of Pennsylvania, again, following those Appalachian Mountains all the way down and then skirting the Gulf of Mexico through Texas, in around Mexico, down through to the Central American countries, and then they start to disperse again into South America. These dotted lines here are the Alberta birds, the 3 Alberta birds, and it's very interesting to see what they did. So they, instead of going due south, they go east into the North Dakota and south then through the Central Flyway, and then they hook up on the same flight path as the Pennsylvania birds down through eastern Mexico, and again, all converging together, but then separating in South America. So they swing in from the east in the northern part, but then they diverge to the east in South America. 2 of them anyway went to Venezuela and Suriname, and one of them, the male, interestingly enough, went to Bolivia. And on the right here is some more recent data that we haven't really incorporated into the data set completely, but this I wanted to share with you. The yellow line here is the very first male that we actually got migration data on at Hawk Mountain, and his name was Brady. He was tagged right at the bottom of Hawk Mountain. And of course, Rosalie is his neighbor. She's coming right from Hawk Mountain. And just look at it, compare those migration routes. Very, very similar migration routes. I know it's based on one bird, but it's interesting to me that Brady ended up wintering at a similar latitude to Rosalie and some of the other birds that I'll show you later. So he showed a kind of different pattern than we're seeing with the Alberta birds, where the male went somewhere completely different. But of course, we need more data. One of the other things was really cool to see was, again, think back to the timing that we just talked about. Birds are leaving at vastly different times from their nesting areas, July, September, August. And yet, as they move south, they continue to move south, what we would see with all of our tag birds is they become more synchronous. And as they enter Texas, they're pretty much all coordinated. It's almost like they're becoming this super bird. They're all connected to each other. And what we found is that Pennsylvania Broadwings all passed through the Veracruz River raptors, which is located right here where the Sierra Madre Mountains converge on the Gulf of Mexico. So a very narrow corridor for these birds that don't want to cross water. So these birds are converging on the Veracruz River raptors, which is the world-renowned highest migration count site in the world. Pennsylvania Broadwings passed all between the date of September 24th and October 3rd. So depending, no matter when they left, they kind of worked it out and they got down there about the same time. And similarly, the Alberta Broadwings all passed by this point within 3 days of each other, but later than the Pennsylvania birds. So there could be some different blips to the population movements that have to do with where they're coming from. And of course, one of the things we're hoping to do in the future is to tag birds from other parts of the range to see how it all fits together. Now let's look at these migration routes again. On the left, we have mapped out the adults. Again, each color is a different bird. And on the right, we have the juveniles. So only 3 of those are shown here. And what do you see as a difference right away? What I see is that juveniles don't go beyond Central America, at least the 3 that we tagged. So when we look at the average distance of migration, what we found is that Pennsylvania adults are traveling on average almost 5,000 miles between their breeding sites and their wintering sites. Yet the juveniles tagged in the exact same area only traveled about 3,200 miles. They all wintered in Mexico, El Salvador, and Panama. Alberta birds, however, traveled the longest, as you might expect, because they started farther north, 6,263 miles on average. And one other thing is that the migration, timing of the migration was on average for juveniles, adults, about between 80 and 90 days. So juveniles are going less distance overall, but they're taking about the same amount of time. Spring migration, we didn't have as many birds data returning, only 1 juvenile, and they just did kind of a weird path into the southern US, and then we lost signal, so they may not have survived, or the unit didn't survive, we never know. And then you can see that the birds in Pennsylvania returned on the same path all the way through Mexico into Texas, but then once they get into the central United States, they show a little bit of a wider path to return, which could have to do with weather or other things. We haven't totally analyzed these data yet. So spring migration, similar pathway to fall migration, but maybe a little bit more scattered. Let's talk about the rate of travel. Everybody's always asking us at the lookout, how fast do these birds fly? Well, these transmitters, of course, don't allow us to get data on a day-by-day basis. So what we did was look at the rate of travel over different parts of the journey. And what we found is that birds start out migrating slower, and then they get faster in this middle part of the migration, and then they get slower again toward the end. So the Alberta birds in this green box here traveled fast. The fastest rate of travel was 226 miles a day, was from 40 degrees latitude to 30 degrees latitude. So just in the southern United States as they were getting into Mexico. Pennsylvania adults traveled fastest from Texas south through Mexico, about 155 miles a day, and juveniles were the slowest, as you might expect, but also were fastest in this area, Pennsylvania juveniles, in the same area as the adults. And this makes sense. I mean, these are not fast flying birds like peregrine falcons. These are birds that are soaring and circling around, and then they trying to save energy. They're going long distances, so they need to save energy. Let's talk a little bit about stopover. Remember, I said this is probably one of the most important questions as far as conservation of these migrating birds, is whether they're stopping it over for periods of time, where they're stopping over, and what habitats they're using. So this is just an example of a stopover. This is a bird called America who was tagged at Hawk Mountain and went and stopped over in this place in southern Mexico. And you can see what it's moving around on its stopover. This is almost 20 days it spent in this spot, highly big forested area. And we have to imagine, although we don't know, that this moving around behavior probably involves hunting for prey to replenish its fuel. So this is what a stopover looks like. We had some really cool data. I'm just going to share one or two examples here with stopover. And Sadie was a bird, a female that we tagged in the Poconos, and she's still up there. We saw her last year, but her transmitter's not working. And she was very faithful to certain stopover sites. This is a place in Shenandoah National Park. She stopped there twice. Once in 2015 and one in 2016 in the early September, and spent several days. So what that indicates is that stopover sites, they may remember them. Birds may be going back to the same spot, just like you might. As you're crossing the country, you know there's a great restaurant out there. You're gonna make sure that you stop at that exit. And I imagine that birds are doing that too. And then she also had the same behavior in Colombia, northern Colombia. She winters in Peru, so she was on her way to Peru, and at least actually three of her migrations, 2 in the fall and 1 in the spring, she stopped over in the same area, which is a protected area in northern Colombia. So I thought that was really cool to see, and something that we want to learn more about in the future. When we look at stopovers, and I know this is a little hard to take in, but bear with me. On the left, we have the fall stopovers, and the right is the spring. And of course, we have less birds in the spring, so you got to keep that in mind. But one of the things that was immediately apparent is that birds are doing a lot more stopping in the fall than the spring, but they're also stopping a lot in the beginning of their migration. Look at all these dots up here. But then once they get going, they keep going, they don't stop a lot. And then once they get into South America, they do a lot more stopping. And in the spring, there's a lot of stopping in the beginning, but then there's a big push to keep going all the way up. So possibly stopovers are more used by the birds in the fall season than the spring season. And the length of stopovers was something we wanted to look at, and I know this is a lot of data, but basically let's look at this section here. We found that Pennsylvania adults were stopping on average about 3.5 days at a time. Alberta adults about 2.5 days, and juveniles were on average 13 days. So that makes sense. They're not as good at finding food, so maybe they need to stop longer to kind of replenish their resources before they continue migrating. Now, what about the stopover sites? We did an analysis, a quick analysis of the habitat around stopover sites. We're going to do more with this later, but 71% of the area around these sites was forested, very similar to that graphic that you saw before for the breeding habitat. So very important conservation finding here. These birds are seeking out areas very similar to where they nest, where there's large patches of forest. If we look at where the birds are wintering, we found that Pennsylvania birds were found wintering. Well, Pennsylvania adults were wintering in Nicaragua, Colombia, Peru, and Brazil. Alberta adults were in Venezuela and Suriname and Bolivia. And the juveniles, of course, as I mentioned before, were all up here in Central America. One of the cool things about the wintering behavior was that the birds appear to be going back to the same spot in the wintering grounds, just like they do in the breeding grounds. A little bit different, because here's one example. This is Sadie. This is that bird that stopped over at very traditional spots. And you can see here in southern Peru that we have 2 years of data. She came down and wintered here 1 year. Next year she comes down and wintered about 50 to 100 miles between those two spots, which is pretty credible. Now, so it's not the exact same spot, but when you're looking at a big map, it looks pretty close. And here's another cool thing. We were trapping birds in vastly different areas of Pennsylvania, far northwest, Hawk Mountain, and the far eastern part of our state, hundreds of miles from one place, at least from the western side of the state to the east. Yet here are 3 birds, 1 bird from each of those 3 sites, and they're all wintering with 84 miles of each other. So here's Sadie, here's Rosalie, Sadie, and Kinzue. Kinzue is from the northwestern part of Pennsylvania, all lined up. Not only are they the same distance, same region, but they're all, every year, they're coming back to that same spot. Now, I don't know if this is just a weird coincidence that southern Peru is an important site for a lot of our Pennsylvania Broadwings that we happen to tag. And we'll certainly with more tagging, we'll know more, but I thought it was pretty interesting that a lot of our birds are ended up in southern Peru. And as we mentioned before, Brady, the one male that we tagged, he showed up in just to the east of where all those females were nesting, were wintering over here on the edge of Brazil. Unfortunately, he's also, you can see he's in an area that's being changed rapidly by conversion into crops. You can see that with all the little white lines. So not sure whether that's a good thing. So I want to finish up soon, but let me quick go over a couple of things about wintering habitat. One of our trainees from the fall, Sandra Cuadros, has been analyzing some data. We just submitted a paper on this, and we wanted to really look at what habitats the birds are using in the winter. And what she found is that 88% of the wintering area, and these little polygons down here, you can kind of see them, the pink ones and the blue ones here, are the wintering areas that the birds are in. 88% of that was forested in different kinds of rainforest, evergreen rainforest, and mostly in these greens. Unfortunately, she also was looking at threats to that habitat, and as we can see, there's a lot of deforestation for agriculture going on in these regions. And then there's also illegal mining within some of the wintering areas that these birds are using. Forest fires are also occurring in this regions of Peru, Brazil, and so forth, but our birds were not found too close to some of those areas where the forest fires are occurring. We have conservation threats on migration, whether it be habitat loss, shooting, pesticide use, that we are certainly concerned about. And as I mentioned, certainly threats on the wintering grounds as well. I want to end with some good news. And this is 2 bits of good news. This is the first one. This is Rosalie. Rosalie, as I've mentioned a few times in this talk, we've been monitoring her since 2016 when she was tagged on Hawk Mountain, but we actually believe that she was nesting on Hawk Mountain as part of our study since 2014. And when she was migrating south this fall in September, she got to Louisiana, and then her transmitter stopped moving. It just stayed in the same place and kept signaling. And we were worried that maybe something happened to her in Louisiana because we weren't seeing it move at all. We had a little bit of hope, maybe that she dropped the transmitter, but you know, what is the chances of that? So we were pretty sad about that. But with all hope against hope, we had observers out in her territory. We found the nest. And just this week, one of our field assistants, Zach, was able to get binoculars on the bird that was on the nest in River Rocks. And guess who it is? It's Rosalie. And we could tell that because she had a green band on her that you see here. And she was glaring at us like she usually does. So happy news that Rosalie is still alive. So this transmitter down here in Louisiana is just blinking away on its own without a bird attached to it. So that is really, really helpful and really important good news for us. So what's next for the project? This year we were hoping to tag birds in Canada, New Hampshire, and Connecticut. And again, because to fully understand the conservation goals for this species, we need to understand its behavior from throughout the range. Maybe birds from Canada are wintering in a completely different area, like the birds from Alberta were doing, or Eastern Canada, or birds from Connecticut and New Hampshire. Where are they going? Are they going through different areas and maybe facing different threats? And of course, we're going to continue to monitor nest success and return rates, and we can use those data to look at survival and come up with a conservation plan for the species. Just recently, unfortunately, because of COVID, we're unable to trap in New Hampshire and Connecticut this year, but we're going to put that on hold and do it next year, so when everything is a little safer. But Rebecca McCabe, my colleague, lives up in Canada now. She's working on her PhD, and this area of Ontario has no COVID and was very, very safe. So she was able to travel over this spring and put transmitters on 3 different females, Charlotte, Diane, and Carolyn, in a very remote area of Ontario. So stay tuned. We will have their maps of their movements up on our website, probably later in June. We don't like to put maps on the website until the nest is pretty much done, so that we don't invite anyone to go visit their nest site. But we're very excited about this. This is going to be really cool data to compare to what we've already collected on Pennsylvania. So I hope you'll all check in weekly, daily, once the migration starts. So thank you for paying attention. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being Hawk Mountain supporters. We really appreciate you. And there's a lot more information on our website. If you like those videos of the nests, you can check them out on our Vimeo site. And we also have videos of how we trap the birds. And we have a Facebook page. So please do like our Facebook page and you'll get updates on what we're learning. So that's it.
Thank you so much, Laurie. That was amazing and such fascinating insights into these epic journeys that these birds are migrating and taking every year. So thank you so much. So another thing that Hawk Mountain has done with this research that Laurie has shared with us is that we have created a curriculum based on the migration data of the broadwing hawk. And it is designed for high school students, and it's all aligned with Pennsylvania core common standards and next generation science standards. We are in the process of working to get this curriculum accessible on our website. We're not quite there yet, but I do want to share my screen quickly and show you where to look on our website to find it coming soon. Okay, so here we have our Hawk Mountain website. You go up to education, go under resources for teachers. All right, and then we're going to scroll down all the way to the bottom, curricula, learn more. Click on learn more. So you can see we have our Black Vulture curriculum, and that material is all able to be downloaded. And scroll down a little further, and here we have the description of the ecological profile of the broadwing hawk curriculum. It's pretty wonderful. So stay tuned to check that out. It'll be coming downloadable to the website, and feel free to contact me if you have questions about that immediately. My email is Dawson, D-A-W-S-O-N, @hawkmountain.org, and we also have our American Kestrel webcam curriculum. Okay, so I also wanted to mention that if you love broadwing hawks, please check out some of our amazing merchandise from our bookstore. We are running a special promotional sale in honor of Laurie's talk today on some broadwing hawk themed merchandise. We have an awesome t-shirt of a kettle of broadwings and also a water bottle on sale. It was just recently posted on our Facebook, and you can also check our online store. So Laurie, now it is time for some questions from the audience. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Awesome. We have some really good questions. Laurie, when you were talking about the pre-migration period, is the female the only one that does the pre-migration, or do the males do that as well?
Well, keep in mind, we've only tagged 2 males successfully. So this is a question that we would like to answer, but so far we've only observed it in females.
Okay, thank you. Did you find any evidence of the relationship between clutch size and prey delivery? For example, if there are a lot of nestlings, do the parents forage more or deliver more diverse prey items?
I don't think that we looked at that, but our clutches, or I should say our number of nestlings was pretty similar. We had most of our nests had 2 or 3 young, but that is something that we could look at and should look at.
Thank you. Next question. how do you give names to the birds? And they commented, Rosalie is amazing. I have to agree with that one.
Yeah. You know, we're one of the ways we fundraise for this project is that people can adopt a bird and name it themselves for a $5,000 donation. The transmitters cost $3,500, and then the data itself costs over $1,000. So that's why we came up with that number of $5,000 just to tag a bird. And that doesn't even cover the staff time and all the other stuff. So yeah, a lot of those birds were named by donors. A couple of them we named ourselves. Obviously, we lobbied hard to get Rosalie name on that bird, but that bird was sponsored by the Kittatinny Ridge Coalition, so they were happy to name it after a strong woman named Rosalie.
Awesome. Next question, where are the Broadwings that migrate through Cape May coming from?
That's a good question. I think they're probably coming mostly from Eastern Canada. And the flyway the birds that are coming through Cape May and the birds that are coming through the Appalachians merge often. They're pretty much the same group of birds, although there's a little bit of difference. We've had some former trainees now that are finishing up a report looking at band recoveries of red-tailed hawks, and I think it's going to be pretty similar with Broadwings. So probably more of the Atlantic, Canadian Atlantic provinces and Maine might go down more through Cape May, but honestly, we don't know. I'm guessing.
All right, thank you. Now we have a question about the transmitters. Are the transmitters built to last the life of the bird?
We wish they would, but unfortunately they don't. The technology, in order to get the transmitter small enough that you can put it on a Broadwing hawk, because a Broadwing hawk is a pretty small bird. It really, at best, we've had one that lasted 4 years. Well, Rosalie was almost 4 years. So that's the best we could hope for. But we've had some that went dead after 2 years, one and a half years, and the bird was still alive. We saw the bird. And the birds sometimes fool with them. We've had some of the birds take the antenna off, and then we know that we're not going to put another $3,000 unit on that bird. So when you talk about larger birds like vultures and eagles, then the transmitters can last for maybe a decade or more. But for these birds, it's just a couple years.
Thanks, Laurie. All right, another question. We're wondering where the birds we see in the fall in Pennsylvania are coming from. Do you have any ideas about that?
Well, listen, now that we have 3 birds tagged in Canada, I'm really hopeful these birds are going to fly right by Hawk Mountain this fall. So my guess is that the birds that we're seeing are birds that breed in New England states, New York State, and then Eastern Canada. So probably a diversity of places.
Thank you. Laurie, where is the best place to see a Broadwing outside of migration?
In Pennsylvania? Right now is not a good time to see Broadwings. They're very secretive when they're nesting. But anywhere that there's forested areas, like nice contiguous forested areas, you could walk some trails and hopefully see a Broadwing, particularly in late April and early May. When they first come back from their spring migration, the male and female are very vocal and they like to interact with each other a lot. So they'll call and they'll move around. So that's a good time to see them. And then of course, again, in late June is also a good time to look out for Broadwings because the young will just be getting ready to leave the nest. The parents are zooming around trying to provide food for the young. So you'll see a lot of activity.
Thanks. I'm going to keep my eyes peeled.
Okay. I'm sure you have one over there.
Yes, yes. Okay, so that's all the questions, and what a wonderful array of questions. So thank you so much to our audience for joining us this afternoon. It really means the world to us to have you connect with us virtually during these times. And Laurie, thank you so much for an amazing presentation. Everyone is very impressed with your research project and your entire team, so thank you so much. To all of our viewers, stay tuned. As always, we have many more virtual programs coming your way soon, and here's a little appetizer for what's in store the next 2 weeks. Next Wednesday, May 27th, We have a Raptors Up Close program, Owls, online with Rich Top Rachel at 1:00 p.m. Then on Thursday, May 28th, we have Sanctuary Storytime, A Nest is Noisy at 11 a.m. Next Friday, May 29th, we have Farmland Raptors at 4:00 p.m. On Wednesday, June 3rd, we have Wonders of Wildflowers with Dr. Saki at 1:00 p.m. And on Friday, June 5th, we have Voyages of the Snowy Owl at 4:00 p.m. So have a fantastic Memorial Day weekend, and we hope to see you all again soon. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.